So I've got a segment today about energy compensation, exercise energy compensation. So this is a topic that we are revisiting. We've covered it before, but a couple things have changed. First of all, now we have graphical capabilities. I can actually insert images on the YouTube presentation that'll make these things, these concepts a little bit more tangible. And now we also have a brand new tool on the Macro Factor website that makes this information a little bit more accessible, but more importantly, a little bit more actionable. You know, you can actually put this stuff to use now. So I figured it was a good time to revisit the concept. And first of all, someone might be asking, what is exercise energy compensation? And I think that's actually best answered by looking at a bit of a problem in the research, something that's come up time and time again. And to address this problem in the research, I want to lean on an article, a MASS article that the good Dr. Eric Helms wrote for MASS. And it's been, we've talked about it before. I don't like the guy, but I still appreciate his work, and I try to stay impartial in that regard.
I was going to ask if we'd squash the beef, but
definitely not.
Sounds like we haven't, and that's the way I like it.
If anything, it's intensifying.
Good.
Yeah. But don't like the guy, but he's done some good things. I have to give him that. So his article was called
"Why Do You Flee the Country and Run Halfway Around the World to New Zealand?" Like it makes you wonder what he's trying to get away from.
It does make you wonder. It makes me wonder a lot, and I got people looking into it.
It should make more people wonder.
Yeah,
just throwing that out there.
Yeah, and where was he when all this Fat Bear Week voting was going on? I don't know.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah. So anyway, his article was called "Why Cardio Isn't as Effective for Fat Loss as You'd Expect." And that pretty much lays out the problem. People have looked at a bunch of different controlled interventions using cardio as a fat loss tool, and results have been, I think it's safe to say, pretty underwhelming. So in this particular article, he was reviewing a paper by Broski and colleagues, which was called "Effective Aerobic Exercise-Induced Weight Loss on the Components of Daily Energy Expenditure."
That's a great name.
Broski? It is a good name. Now, in this study, they had 42 participants. They were individuals with obesity, and they were put into 3 groups. One was basically a control group. One was an aerobic exercise group that was doing a lower amount of total weekly exercise. So they were trying to burn 8 kilocalories per kilogram of body weight per week. So they were kind of tailoring the exercise dose accordingly. And then there was also this higher expenditure group who was shooting for 20 kilocalories per kilogram of weight per week. So they were doing this intervention. They were also looking at a whole bunch of metrics pertaining to energy expenditure. So the Cliff Notes, I'll put up a table that shows some of the more detailed results of the intervention, but the Cliff Notes is the high expenditure group. They did lose a statistically significant amount of body weight, but it was only half the amount that would be expected mathematically. If you basically crunch the numbers and said, how many calories were they supposed to burn off with this exercise dose, it basically only delivered about half of the mathematically anticipated weight loss. They also found that their total daily energy expenditure increased by about 4%, driven by the increase in exercise. But when they brought them into a metabolic chamber and directly measured their energy expenditure for 24 hours, of course,
at rest, right?
At rest, yeah. So I was going to say, of course, in that chamber, they weren't exercising.
Yeah.
When they took it from free living conditions and said, okay, without the added influence of that exercise, what's your kind of just basal resting energy expenditure like? Resting, not basal, over this 24-hour period. And it actually decreased by 4%. It appeared that there was kind of a compensatory change in other non-exercise elements of energy expenditure. Now, the lower dose group that was doing less exercise, their body weight was not reduced to a statistically significant degree. So basically what they concluded there was that aerobic exercise at this higher dose was able to produce weight loss, but it was less weight loss than expected, which appeared to be related to some kind of compensatory reduction in non-exercise elements of energy expenditure. So that brings me to a model that really is at the center of the conversation about exercise energy compensation. So Herman Poncer is a researcher down the road at Duke, and he has really popularized this idea of the constrained total energy expenditure model. And I'm going to put up a figure that kind of demonstrates what this model proposes. But a lot of Poncer's early work was looking at total daily energy expenditure in different societies with very different physical activity levels. And one of the things he noticed was, I mentioned in the previous study by Broski, they kind of did a mathematical assumption of how much weight ought to be lost. And going into that model going into those calculations is the assumption of the additive model, which if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it on the left side of the screen. But the idea with the additive model is very simple. It's basically if you add some exercise to your routine and you add maybe 200 calories per day of exercise, then your total energy expenditure will go up by 200 calories. If you add 300 calories of exercise, total energy expenditure will go up by 300 calories, right? It's a very, very straightforward thing. Now, the constrained model, which you'll see on the right side of your screen if you're watching on YouTube, this paints a different picture. Now, what this indicates is that as you increase more and more exercise or other types of physical activity, total daily energy expenditure will go up. But at a certain point, you start to get some diminishing returns. It looks like there's some kind of ceiling effect, some kind of constraint on energy expenditure when physical activity levels get really, really high. And one of the things that is playing into that apparent ceiling effect is it appears to be some adaptive changes in non-exercise components of energy expenditure. So as the model dictates, as you start ramping physical activity up and up and up and up and get to really high levels, there will be compensatory reductions in other, more resting components of energy expenditure that basically those adaptive changes appear to just offset the tremendous energy cost of this added activity. And you could kind of take it back to evolutionary mechanisms and theories about why it might be disadvantageous for us to just kind of scale up energy expenditure more and more and more as we have high activity levels. Yeah. You could imagine in an environment in which food is scarce and you might have increased activity for foraging, gathering, hunting, whatever the case may be, it might be helpful in some cases for there to be some constraint on how much your energy expenditure ramps up.
Yeah.
Now,
and also to be clear for the people who are listening to this, can't see the model on screen. It's also like proposed to be a pretty dose dependent thing, right?
Absolutely. That's a good point. Yeah.
Like if you're currently incredibly sedentary, don't exercise at all and start, just going for a daily walk and burning 100 calories through exercise. That might lead to a 100 calorie increase in your total daily energy expenditure. But if you're already very active, exercising a lot, burning 1,000 calories per day through exercise, and you add 10% more exercise to where now you're burning 1,100 calories per day through exercise, like you're going from high to even higher. That 100 calorie increase in exercise, since you're already quite active, will lead to an increase in total daily energy expenditure, likely considerably smaller than 100 calories.
Yeah.
So the constrained model behaves very similarly to the additive model. If you're going from sedentary to lightly active to like moderately active, maybe. But if you're going from like moderately active to very active, or like very active to extremely active, then some more of those adaptive mechanisms set in to where you have reductions larger reductions in other components of total energy expenditure.
Correct. Yeah. And that's a good point. And there's really two main misconceptions that have picked up a lot of steam, and a lot of people kind of reinforce these misconceptions unintentionally. And so they've kind of been popularized. But the first misconception is the one that you just mentioned, which is that a lot of people just completely ignore the fact that this is a dose-dependent, non-linear thing that's happening, right? So like you said, as you go higher and higher into really high levels of physical activity, the compensatory reductions in other components of energy expenditure get increasingly larger and larger. So that's the one thing. The other misconception, which is probably the more impactful one, is people seem to indicate that the level of compensation here, the amount of energy that's being offset by these adaptive reductions in other non-exercise components, people seem to reinforce the idea that the compensation level is 100%. Like, I've heard a lot of people who have said, you cannot increase your total daily energy expenditure through exercise.
Yeah.
Because if you increase, 100 calories of exercise, you're just going to decrease 100 calories of other stuff.
Yeah.
It is very important to note that is absolutely not what this model indicates. If you look at how it's depicted by the person who created it.
And more importantly, it's not what the data underlying the model indicate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The much more important element is that people keep spreading this idea as if we can't just look at actual papers that have measured this stuff.
Yeah.
And the compensation level is simply not 100%. It is well below 100%, but that brings us to kind of the main question here in this segment, which is, well, what is the magnitude of compensation? And just to be super clear, when I talk about the magnitude of compensation, I'm talking about, to what percentage of this increase in exercise energy expenditure is being offset by compensatory reductions in other components of total daily energy expenditure. So the magnitude of compensation, if you're asking what is it, well, it's not 100%, but unfortunately, it turns out to be quite variable from person to person and from context to context. So I wish that I could say, hey, it's not 100%, it's 30. But I can't really say that because it's extremely context dependent and it does vary a lot among individuals. So there are a few key characteristics that we can look at when we're trying to figure out, okay, well, for me, or maybe for my client that I'm coaching, what is a reasonable expectation for the magnitude of compensation?
And just to make all of this very explicit, because I think sometimes people get confused when you're throwing out percentages. It's like, percentage of what? So just to be like very, very explicit, to say that 30% compensation occurs implies that if you burn 100 calories from exercise, 30% of those calories won't kind of contribute to increases in total daily energy expenditure. So 30% compensation means if exercise increases by 100 calories, total daily energy expenditure increases by 70 calories.
Correct.
So like a higher compensation number means a smaller increase in total daily energy expenditure as exercise increases. A smaller compensation number means a larger increase in total daily energy expenditure as exercise increases.
Exactly. So yeah, for that 100 calories worth of exercise example, if you're doing that 100 calories of extra exercise and it's a 10% compensation value, your total daily energy expenditure goes up by 90 calories. If it's a 50% compensation value, then total daily energy expenditure only goes up by 50 calories.
Yeah.
So one of the things that a lot of people have kind of speculated about is, does this vary based on biological sex? Does it seem to differ a lot when we compare males to females? And there is a paper by Carreau and colleagues. It's the best evidence available to date to actually explore that question. And the answer appears to be no. It doesn't seem like there's kind of a systematic bias by which compensation levels differ when we compare males to females for this particular outcome. As we've mentioned previously, people have asked, does it differ depending on your total activity level? Absolutely. So if you are someone who, like you said earlier, has a very low baseline activity level and you're just adding a little bit of exercise, you can anticipate a low compensation value, which means you're getting the most bang for your buck if you're increasing physical activity and hoping to increase total daily energy expenditure. If you're someone who is extremely active already, then you can expect a much larger compensation factor, which again means that the exercise that you're adding is having a more constrained or restricted impact on total daily energy expenditure. Mm-hmm. So activity level absolutely plays a big role. Another thing that plays a big role, apparently, seems to be energy balance. So I'm going to put an image on the screen here. This is from a paper by Willis and colleagues, but they were interested in looking at using a big sample of participants with really high quality measurements. They had doubly labeled water data accessible for this particular study. They were looking at essentially the degree of compensation and how that varies for people who are in negative, neutral, or positive energy balance. So, neutral energy balance means you're just eating at maintenance, basically staying pretty weight stable. Negative energy balance means you're in a caloric deficit, and so over time, you could expect to be losing weight. And positive energy balance means you're in an energy surplus, which means over a longer time scale, you could expect to gain weight. Now, for people who are in neutral or positive energy balance, the additive model did just fine. So again, the additive model basically assumes minimal compensation. Technically, it assumes zero compensation. So what that tells us is people in neutral and positive energy balance, the compensation value is quite low, such that the additive model did just fine in terms of kind of predicting how total energy expenditure would change or what kind of compensation level we would anticipate. However, looking specifically at people in negative energy balance, so people who were in an energy deficit, the constrained model did a better job explaining the data when compared to the additive model. So what that tells us is for someone who's in negative energy balance, we can expect that it will essentially increase the degree to which they compensate for an increase in exercise energy expenditure. So smaller compensation values for people in neutral or positive energy balance, larger compensation values for people in negative energy balance. One final consideration or characteristic that comes up a lot in this research is BMI. Now, there was the study I mentioned previously by Carreau and colleagues, excellent study, and a really, really nice data set that they're working with. It's the doubly labeled water database. I forget the acronym of who houses it. It's like the International Atomic Energy Agency or something like that.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. But anyway, huge database. There have been a lot of great papers coming out of it lately. Really impressive collaborative multi-center effort, which is what we need in the research world. So the reason I keep kind of like gushing about it is because it really is a tremendous utility for the research world. But anyway, this paper by Carreau and colleagues, they identified that compensation levels did seem to vary based on BMI. And what they found was when they looked at people at the 10th percentile of BMI, so people with low BMI values, the compensation value that they calculated was around 29-30%, give or take. When they looked at the 90th percentile of BMI, so higher BMI values, the compensation value was all the way up around 46%. So it was a meaningful BMI-related difference in terms of the compensation value. But the question about BMI is really challenging. I'm not quite certain what to do with it, practically speaking, because when we look at an observational relationship like this, where BMI seems to be predictive of compensation values, there are a few things that could be going on. So for example, a question you might ask is, is high exercise energy compensation a hereditary characteristic that predisposes someone to developing a higher BMI, or does the development of a higher BMI somehow increase exercise energy compensation? It's kind of a chicken and egg scenario, and an observational study like this doesn't really give us an opportunity to answer that with a high degree of confidence. One possibility, someone might also ask, is it possible that energy compensation estimates might be to some extent distorted by the fact that BMI fails to distinguish between fat mass and fat-free mass, which obviously fat-free mass is far more predictive of resting energy expenditure. That is possible. Some of these studies try to go in and account for that statistically, but it is something that muddies the water a little bit when we try to make when we try to take that BMI information and kind of extrapolate to body fat percentage or something like that. Another question that I think is a really important question is it possible that people with higher BMIs in these studies are simply more likely to be intentionally restricting energy intake, such that the observed effect of BMI is actually more related to the current state of energy balance?
Yeah.
To me, that is a really important potential confounder that, when we look at these huge sets of data, is it possible that people with higher BMIs are more likely to be doing physical activity for the purpose of weight reduction, or they might be simultaneously trying to establish an energy deficit? So it's very possible that the BMI effect could be really just showing us what was previously discussed in that Willis paper, which is that higher compensation values are observed in negative energy balance.
Yeah, it's like the classic finding that people who consume more diet sodas tend to have higher BMIs, but it's like, the diet sodas aren't causing that. Like they're going out of their way to drink diet soda because they're trying to lose weight.
Yeah. So I presented some questions here that are worth consideration that I simply don't have the answers to. But the ones I presented so far are kind of specific. Here's a vague one that is still applicable. It's still a very valid question, which is, could there simply be other behavioral characteristics that just distinguish individuals with low BMIs from individuals with higher BMIs, such that the observed effect of BMI is driven by something else entirely? With this type of observational approach so far, like I said, it's the best data that we currently have, but there are inherently limitations to the types of conclusions we can draw. So when it comes to the BMI effect, I'm simply not that certain about what to do with it. It's something that I'm monitoring really closely whenever a new study comes out. I got my hopes up this past month. There was a study that came out that looked like maybe it would provide some additional insight, but unfortunately, it just didn't get at the question the way I was hoping it would. And so for now, the BMI relationship exists. It's something that's out there. But in terms of practical application, it's one that we simply don't know what to do with. But what we can say with a decent amount of certainty so far, based on the evidence, is that the degree of compensation doesn't appear to be dictated by biological sex, definitely seems to depend on activity level, and does seem to be related to the individual's current state of energy balance.
I can tell you what my hunch is for the BMI thing, as someone who does certainly have plenty of experience with both being fat and just being very different sizes throughout my life. I think that first thing you threw out, is high exercise energy compensation a hereditary characteristic, or does the development of obesity somehow increase compensation? I suspect it's probably both. That's like, I certainly have hereditary factors working against me. And even when like I am or have been smaller, like a thing that people tell me is like, hey, oh man, like I can go for a jog in the morning and like I feel great. That just energizes me for the rest of the day. And whenever someone says that to me, I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm not denying their experience, but I can tell you good and well, I have never had that experience in my life. If I do any exercise whatsoever, even if I'm already in good shape, it doesn't have an energizing effect. Like I just want to chill the rest of the day. Or at least chill more than I otherwise would have. But then also the impact of that is also influenced by how large I am at the time. Like when I am smaller, exercise just doesn't take it out of me as much the same way. So yeah, like I think that that is always just kind of like a factor in the background based on just some hereditary characteristics I'm dealing with. But I also think that for me personally, like my exercise energy compensation is a lot higher when I'm heavier than when I'm not.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. And there, you know, we follow the research more closely than the typical person, because every month we're going through the journal sweep with hundreds of studies and just keeping an eye on what people are doing. I would say that this particular question is on my very short list of research questions that I'm eagerly trying to chase down. Mm-hmm. I really hope that people will get at this from creative ways, like take really creative approaches. I think one thing that comes to mind is like, it would be interesting to expand upon your anecdote with even just some qualitative research, getting groups of people with very different body sizes and weight histories, and just saying, what is your experience with exercise? How does it impact your energy level the rest of that day, that week? How does it impact appetite responses? Like, I do think that that's a really valuable, it's a valuable opportunity where qualitative research could really help dictate how to get at it in the future experimentally.
Yeah.
And I'd like to just broadly see more qualitative research in our field. I think, I know that James Steele's group has done a few qualitative studies recently, and that's a trend that I very much like. Mm-hmm. I hope that people will carry that forward.
Israel Halperin and his collaborators, they do some qualitative work too, right?
Yeah. It's a lot of people, when they see a qualitative study, they kind of have a double take if they're not used to that whole world of research. But it can really help fill in gaps and guide a lot of hypothesis generation for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, if we just ignore qualitative research, there is a just large breadth of human experience that is difficult to quantify in like newtons or inches or kilograms or whatever. That, yeah, like if we don't have if we don't have qualitative research or just like ignore the qualitative research, we're essentially closing ourselves off from like a pretty large proportion of the total questions that could be asked and tentatively answered by research.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So moving on, we've talked about all this exercise energy compensation stuff. It seems interesting, but it's kind of hard to put that into action. You have to do a lot of calculations and kind of make a lot of estimates about what this value should be and that value should be. So that is why we developed a tool to help with this. So I'll link it in the show notes. If you go to macrofactorapp.com/exercise calorie calculator with a hyphen between all those three words there, it'll take you to a calculator that estimates the net impact of a specific exercise bout on your total daily energy expenditure. So it will be customized to your body size, the modality of exercise, the duration of and the intensity of exercise, and we will also basically do a prediction of your compensation value based on the characteristics that we gather in this tool. So we ask you kind of a short series of questions, use that information to determine things like your most likely resting energy expenditure, your most likely compensation value. We get the characteristics of the exercise bout. And for the exercise bout, what we do is we pull MET values from the 2011 Compendium of Physical Activity by Ainsworth and colleagues. So that full compendium has like over 800 types of exercise. So I think if people check out this tool, they're going to be very surprised to see the variety of exercise modalities and intensities that are represented within this tool. So previously, I had made a little spreadsheet available. I didn't really talk about it much, but I made a little spreadsheet and it was like, well, you have to go find the MET value of your exercise and you have to go tell me what you think your compensation value is and stuff like that. It just wasn't very user-friendly, which is why I didn't talk about it much. It was like, hey, this exists, but there's a lot of footwork that you have to do yourself.
Yeah.
In this instance, you just click the link, answer some really basic questions about yourself, and it helps you out. So obviously, people are going to be critical and say, oh, you're just trying to push this thing. It's totally free. you couldn't possibly make us any richer by using this. So this isn't like a big advertisement. This is just an area of research I've been following closely, and we're pretty stoked to be able to put together a tool that we think is pretty helpful here.
Yeah, because I mean, like this concept isn't totally novel. Like there are like exercise calculators out there that you can find, but I haven't seen another one that gives any sort of guidance about what amount of compensation you should expect. So they seem to tacitly operate on the additive model, or just kind of like hope that you know what to do with it. Like if you like go on a run and it says like, oh yeah, you probably burn like 350 calories on that run. And it's like, well, what should you do with it? Like how much should that impact your dietary targets? How much is that likely to impact your total daily energy expenditure? Who knows? Like you could look through the research for yourself and like try to make some estimates. But this calculator is novel in the sense that like it does all of that legwork for you based on the research that we have and what we do currently know about energy compensation. Instead of just kind of spitting out how many calories it expects you have burned in the training session itself or the exercise session itself, it estimates what that likely net impact is on your total daily energy expenditure. And the thing I love about it the most is it actually gives like a probable range for where those compensation values might fall. We need ranges on a lot more things in this world, folks. Especially if you're predicting something or estimating something. Like I understand why people do this, and I'm not faulting anyone for it. Like it's a lot easier for any sort of just like web app or whatever to just like do some math and spit out a single number that looks like a very precise point estimate. And it's a lot harder to kind of like deal with the logic on the back end to like present things as a range in the first place. So I don't think anyone's trying to be like dishonest or trying to mislead people, but I do think a lot of just online calculators that exist for all sorts of things do give people sometimes like an excessive illusion of precision about the calculations they're doing. Where if something says like, dude, you're burning 437.6 calories, you're like, holy shit, like, if you got that decimal in there, man, it must be that or something extremely, extremely close to it. But no, I mean, anything like this, it's an estimate. Like it's an approximation at best. So any estimate, there is like an inherent implied range of variability around that point estimate. And this calculator actually makes it explicit, which I think is very nice.
Yeah, I think, like you said, there are other exercise energy expenditure calculators that exist, but they basically have three things that I would view as shortcomings, or maybe we're just doing a different thing than what they're doing. But like you said, they don't reflect the level of precision very well. They just give you a single number. They don't really give you a range to help you understand, okay, I know this isn't exact, but what's the realistic probable range we're talking about here? So that's one shortcoming. Another thing is that they don't frame it relative to your predicted resting energy expenditure. And the reason that matters is because if you were not exercising, you would still exist. So the question is not how many calories did I burn during that session, but how many more did I burn versus an alternate reality where I was just hanging out, sitting around. So the added component is important there. And then another element, like you said, is they don't take any effort to deal with the concept of energy compensation, which, again, as we've talked about, it's not 100%, but it's certainly not 0% in the vast majority of cases either. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think people listening might say, okay, that sounds good. It sounds like you've improved upon an idea that previously existed, but you might be wondering why this would actually be useful, aside from just being interesting. So there's three use cases that come to mind for me. The first one, most straightforward based on some of the research we've talked about previously. This calculator makes it easier to incorporate exercise changes into a weight loss program or a weight gain program. But basically it helps you say, okay, I'm changing up my exercise. How might I change up my nutrition in order to accommodate that while I'm pursuing some kind of weight-related goal, whether it's weight loss, weight gain, weight maintenance. So this helps you make, since it is focusing on the net impact on total daily energy expenditure, it's a much more tangible way to make those kinds of decisions about how you can adjust your diet to accommodate these exercise changes. A second potential use case, maybe you're just cruising toward whatever body composition goal that you have in mind, but there's some atypical exercise bout that pops up, right? So like maybe you're going to do like a charity run, or you're going to accompany a friend on like a pretty tough hike. And you're like, okay, I want to account for that with my dietary intake. I like the rate of weight change I'm experiencing, and I just want to keep it going. So I want to make sure I'm accommodating this unexpected increase in expenditure. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, a one-off exercise bout like this is not going to derail your long-term efforts, whether you're trying to gain, lose, maintain weight. But some people simply want to, some people just feel better about saying, okay, I feel like I'm taking some proactive step to kind of steady the ship here and keep my energy availability relatively constant, rather than having this huge variation where this one day I'm in an unusually large deficit, right? So that's a very justifiable use case for this. Another one would be, maybe you're gearing up for an anticipated change in your exercise habits, and you just want to be proactive about ensuring that you're actually fueling those efforts. So maybe you're really kicking up your training a notch, or maybe you're going to do like a charity run and you're going to start a training program for it, and you're like, I just want to make sure that I am fueling those workouts effectively, and that as I ramp up my physical activity here, that I'm going to be, adequately fueled for workouts and adequately recovering from them as well. You want to make sure that you're not under eating relative to your change in exercise. And so this gives you a tool that helps you do that in a way that's really personalized. These predictive equations, like I said, are going to be completely tailored to your situation, which is very different from just relying on some heuristic that says, oh yeah, running generally burns about this many calories or something like that. So what I'm going to do is on the screen on YouTube, if I can figure out the technology, I'm going to actually show an example here. So basically you can go into this tool and it's going to ask you to select a type of exercise, right? And so for this example, I'm going to put in cycling as the prompt here. And I'm going to scroll down and find stationary bicycling. And I'm going to do that at 90 to 100 watts. So maybe I've got like one of those, stationary bikes that shows me my wattage on the screen as I'm pedaling. And I'm planning to be 90, 100 watts. But of course, if you open up the tool and look at the different exercises available, there is a huge variety. It's not like everything is going to make you calculate a watt value. Some of it is very, very real world in terms of how it describes the exercise. Some of it is more quantitative, like this particular selection. So you're going to choose the exercise type and confirm it. Then you're going to type in the duration in minutes. So we're going to say 30 minutes of cycling in this 90 to 100 watt range. You're going to put in your body weight for this example. We'll say 70 kilograms. That's kind of the most generic body weight you'll ever find in the research. It's always a 70 kilogram person. Body fat percentage, let's say 15%, but as you can see, hopefully on the screen, the tool does provide some visuals to kind of help you broadly assess where your body fat percentage might be. And this doesn't have to be exact. You just have to get within within hopefully a few percentage points either way. It doesn't have to be precise. Just want to get in the ballpark there.
Close only counts for horseshoes, hand grenades, and also this exercise energy expenditure calculator.
Absolutely,
as the popular saying goes.
Absolutely. And then now, what we're going to do is indicate whether we're gaining, losing, or maintaining weight currently, because like we said previously, current energy status can be a pretty important factor. So for this example, I'm going to say I'm maintaining weight, so I'm in neutral energy balance, relatively speaking. It's going to ask how many training sessions I typically do per week. And this isn't specific necessarily to this exercise bout. It's just your general training habits overall. So I'm going to say I train 1 to 3 training sessions per week throughout a typical week. And it's also going to ask me about my general activity level. So for this example, let's say that I walk somewhere between 5,000 to 15,000 steps per day. That would put me in the moderate activity level category. So I'm going to select that. And if you don't know how many steps per day you take, that's totally fine. Those are just to kind of help people get a general vibe of how these categories work. But you basically can make your own assessment about, generally speaking, outside of the gym, outside of structured exercise, your non-exercise activity level day to day. Are you typically pretty sedentary, pretty active, or kind of moderate, or somewhere in the middle? So you're going to type in those things. Pretty simple, pretty easy to use. And it's going to tell me that my added energy expenditure from exercise after accounting for compensation is 136 kilocalories, but the probable range is somewhere in the ballpark of 78 to 194 calories. So this is how the tool works. Again, this is trying to assess the net impact on total daily energy expenditure, which can be very, very informative for the variety of use cases that I mentioned. The last thing I want to mention, though, here is there is one use case that I would very strongly, in no uncertain terms, discourage. There's one way that I really don't want to see people using this tool. I have no way of knowing if anyone uses it for this, but I would really discourage people from using this tool for one specific thing. So Halloween is coming up in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
It is a candy-driven holiday. And Thanksgiving is coming up as well, believe it or not. It kind of snuck up this year, as it does all years. But within the next six weeks, we're going to have two very food-focused holidays in the United States. And a lot of well-intentioned fitness enthusiasts and fitness professionals and influencers on the internet are going to talk a little bit about, they're going to post about how, if you have 2 fun-sized Kit Kat bars, here's how many miles you have to walk to offset that, or here's how many minutes of circuit training you have to do to burn off those calories.
How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? I have no idea, but here's how many jumping jacks you would need to do to make up for it.
Exactly. So that is a genre of fitness content that is going to hit the internet pretty hard over the next 6 weeks or so. And people are going to start kind of reinforcing this idea of making these transactional deals where you're trading exercise in order to afford some kind of food, whether it's, mashed potatoes on Thanksgiving or a fun-sized Reese cup on Halloween. So people are going to be reinforcing this idea that you have to earn calories or that you have to trade exercise in order to justify eating calories. That is completely antithetical to everything that we believe about eating and exercise. It reinforces some really problematic perspectives about food and exercise. It is based on the literature pertaining to the psychology that goes into eating behaviors. It's just bad news in every possible sense. Okay, so we absolutely don't enforce that, or we don't support or reinforce that kind of perspective about the relationship between food and exercise. If you want a candy bar, eat a damn candy bar. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to, cross off some list and say, yeah, I did 146 jumping jacks or whatever calculation you find. We want to completely separate ourselves from that perspective. And I would really discourage using this particular tool to try to do any kind of transactional bargaining where you say, okay, I've decided that, tonight I'm going to have this 300 calorie kind of hedonic deviation. So let me go and kind of mess around with this calorie calculator and see what I got to do to make up for that. I just would strongly discourage people from doing that, because that's no way to live. And based on the research, it's also no way to view food or exercise.
Yeah, it's radical perspective, but it's fine to simply enjoy things.
Right.
I think that like the Protestant, like the Puritan ethos has just like deeply infected the American mind. Like to an extent where like it applies to even people who wouldn't consider themselves like particularly puritanical, where there's this idea I think some people have where if you enjoy something too much, like if something's too good, it's got to be bad in some way. Like it has to be perhaps sinful in like the original conception. And so you either need to have like guilt or shame attached to it, or you need to like self-flagellate and do some sort of penance. Like in this case, like X number of sit-ups to like burn off that Hershey's bar or whatever. And like, yeah, you just don't have to. It's fine to just enjoy things, have a good time. And especially since they're holidays. I mean, Halloween comes around once a year. Thanksgiving comes around once a year. It would be virtually impossible to do so much damage on those days that it significantly derails you from whatever goals you're pursuing the other 363 days out of the year. So yeah, it's fine. Like just have fun, enjoy yourself. Don't come to this calculator on November 1st and try to figure out what you got to do to pay off the debt.
Yeah, I mean, mathematical estimates of the energy cost of storing a new kilogram of fat, somewhere in the ballpark of 9,400 kilocalories. So yeah, doing the calculus for the fun size Kit Kat bar is psychologically not ideal and physiologically irrelevant in the long run for your body composition goals. And one more thing, one of the very fun things about Macro Factor that I think is super cool is the Thanksgiving thing. So with AI describe within it, you can kind of speak into the phone microphone and kind of report your food that way. And you can basically just say like, is it Thanksgiving or is it Thanksgiving dinner?
It is Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, so if you just say Thanksgiving dinner, it'll actually give you like a pretty representative meal for Thanksgiving dinner that you can log. So that way you can be like, okay, like I'm generally, keeping my finger on the pulse here, but I'm having a low stress, enjoyable, food-centered holiday that doesn't have any guilt or shame associated with it. And you don't have to walk around and say, hey, Grandma, can I weigh the cranberry sauce when you're not using it?
Yeah, it's a recipe that we get from the Nutrition X library, composed of several of their common food entries. 6 ounces of turkey, a cup of mashed potatoes with gravy, half a cup of stuffing, half a cup of sweet potato casserole, half a cup of green bean casserole, quarter cup of cranberry sauce, a dinner roll, teaspoon of butter, and a slice of pumpkin pie. That's like what goes into just like the general entry here for Thanksgiving dinner. It's like 700 or 1,760 calories, which I don't know, that feels about right.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you eat a little more than that, a little less than that, if there's some degree of tracking error, even like a reasonably significant degree of tracking error for just like one meal one day a year, like just relax. It's fine. Like that's not going to throw anything off.
Yeah.